Hello and welcome to the Wire Talks. I'm Sidharth Bhatia. The Aadhar card has gone through many iterations since it was launched 15 or so years ago. What was supposed to be for the transfer of benefits has now become an all purpose card. There is almost nothing one can do: get a phone, open a bank account, or even get a child admitted to school without an Aadhar card. There are many instances of people who have been denied payments for welfare schemes because of some discrepancy in their card. There have been cases of identity theft. Most of all, there is the question of privacy of a person's data. How did we reach here despite many Supreme Court judgments which have clearly said that no one should suffer for not getting an Aadhar card? And the authorities have said that the data was leak proof. Many activists and experts had warned against some of these possibilities and problems very early on. Among them was Usha Ramanathan, a lawyer who works on the jurisprudence of law, poverty, and rights. She has been tracking and engaging with the Indian National ID Project and has written extensively on the subject. A regular speaker at universities and other law institutions, she was a member of the expert group on privacy set up by the Planning Commission of India, which gave its report in October 2012. She joins us today to discuss Aadhaar and how it has affected Indian citizens. Usha Ramanathan, welcome to the Wire Talks.
Thank you, Sidharth.
You were among those who expressed concerns about it right from the beginning. What were the dangers you had foreseen at that stage?
See, there were a number of things that were a problem that we could see even at that stage in the project. The first was actually right when the project was, when we first heard about the project, I don't think I was particularly concerned because I thought it would be something like the voter ID where every person would get an ID and it would really help them. Like the voter ID did, because the voter ID helped them not only in voting, but it also helped them in establishing their identity. And I thought that's not such a bad thing, especially for people who live in a twilight zone of poverty. But it's my work on law and poverty that brought me to this project, because they kept saying, the project authorities kept saying that this is so that the poor can access their entitlements. And that seemed like a good objective. But after the first minus draft that I read of the project, and then when I was present at a meeting and participated in the meeting on 23rd November 2009, held at the National Law School in Bangalore, it was clear that the decision had been made to carry on with the project, regardless of what anybody said about it. And that was one. And it was clear that it was being done by persons from the corporate world. They were not, Mr. Nilekani, a year later, when he was asked, so what is the difference between 1 year ago when you started the project and now? He said, well, 1 year ago, I knew New York better than I knew any town in India. So to hand over the population of this country to a person who really doesn't know this country and the people at all was plainly a problem. And activists working on the ground on the right to food, on the right to work, on the right to information, many of these people were saying that this is not going to help us at all. In fact, it might come to stifle us in various ways. So and then when I started reading the documents that were produced by the UIDAI, I found that one of the things was biometrics. So they were planning to use fingerprints and iris. And Mr. Ram Sevak Sharma, who was then the mission director in 2011 in a frontline interview, had actually said that we might be able to enroll everybody, but about authentication, we can't say now because manual workers will have their fingerprints, damaged, and therefore it may not be possible for them to authenticate themselves. Then there was the question of privacy. There is a presumption that because we talk to each other and tell each other many things, we actually don't care about privacy. Actually, we do care a lot about privacy in many ways. And even if we don't, in our constitutional law, there is a principle which says that even if we don't want a fundamental right, we can't waive it, which means nobody else can act as if we don't have that right, especially no state agency. So to say in 2015, when the government went to the court and said people of this country don't have a right to privacy, that was like a shocker. Only for many of us, we were not surprised because this project could not proceed unless the right to privacy was decimated. It was not possible for them to proceed unless they really threw it out of the window. In the early stages, there was also the question of surveillance being launched over a whole population. Because basically, the state would have all this data with them, and then they could decide how they wanted to read each citizen, each person. The third is that it's also around that time that we had this whole question of citizenship being brought up and the Supreme Court getting in on it. In Assam, you were having the problems that you were having. TCS was involved in that whole exercise. And we realized that all these companies, the tech companies, are looking for the state as a customer. And we were worried that the state as a customer would basically mean a collaboration between the state and corporate interest, which would not be in the interests of the citizen. Broadly, these are some of the things that, I mean, there are many more, but I wouldn't go on with them, or it would take me all the time that we have today to speak about it.
There was also the impression, this is the layperson's impression, that those who are in technology, the tech people, had begun to think, or were thinking at that time, that technology solves every problem. It is not that technology can do this project, it's that technology will solve every problem in this country. So this one can only say arrogance of the technologists, tech people. Was that a feature that you noticed too?
Actually, it's interesting because I don't think the technology people were finding solutions. They were finding means by which they could enter and capture markets. And how do you sell that? I mean, we must never forget that Mr. Nilekani is an ace marketing man. So the one thing that you do when you're a good marketing person is you tell people what will sell. And it was also a time that was ripe in the sense that in the early years of this century, late years of the last decade of the last century and early years of the century, we had a huge problem with PDS, with the ration system. And right to food activists were working to shore it up. Then there was, in the first 10 years of this decade, if you remember, the question of corruption had become really huge. And that's how the Congress got dislodged when it was finally dislodged in 2014. So these proved to be very convenient for tech to sell itself. And I must also say that when I say tech to sell itself, it isn't as if all of the technology world is involved in this exercise. They have come in at different points in time, it is true. TCS has come in for certain things, Wipro for certain other things. But it is a technology mind, a business mind that got into the UIDAI. See, one of the things that happened is Mr. Nilekani comes from the business world. You can't ask him to think like an activist or like a social worker or whatever. He will think like a businessman. But that the government gave him state power and state authorization to do whatever it was that he wanted to do meant that, we were only going to see what they felt their ambition was. So actually, in the beginning, when we thought, how are they even going to do this? It's not even possible in a country that is semi-literate, in a country where there are many people who are illiterate and therefore will not be able to see whether the data that is being gathered about them is right or wrong, to be able to read and say whether it's okay or not. In an ambition where within 5 years they wanted to have the critical mass of people onto a database, we did wonder how did they think it was even possible to get a good database created. Only later, we realized in 2011, when Mr. Nilekani was chair of a committee called TAGUP, which is the Technology Advisory Group on Unique Projects, where he said that this is like a self-cleaning project. We all know that it is garbage in, garbage out, but you quickly get everything on, and then there will be self-cleaning that will happen. That is, people will have to clean this up for themselves, otherwise the system will not work for them. So the burden was being put on the ordinary citizenry to make sure that the data was reflected in such a way that they could use it as an ID. And from 2006 onwards, from 2001 onwards, actually, with the TCS report after the Kargil war, 1999 and 2001, actually, one for the center and one for Gujarat. And then later with 2006 with the Wipro report for the Planning Commission, and then with Mr. Nilakani coming in and this whole project, rolling out. Throughout, it has been about how private industry and how business and how the market can enter the space and make the most that they can for getting the state as a customer and getting the whole population as customers. It's a fascinating thing that they've done. I mean, it's incredible when you think about the scale of it, but when you think about the harm that that causes, that too is incredible.
No, you brought up the subject of the harm that it creates. We've seen in the newspapers some of the problems that have emerged. As I was saying, there have been cases of children not getting midday meals or admission, or Manrega workers not getting their wages, and there's been identity theft and much more. Take us through some of the really serious problems that have emerged apart from this and along with this.
See, the one thing to remember is that there has been just one audit of this project. And that audit of the project was a CAG audit, which meant that it only concerned itself with the monies that were spent on the project, not on the databases of the project itself. It is important also to remember that from the time they started, from 2010, I remember reading consistently, and then we've of course seen it unroll in our midst, that this was called the JAM Trinity, which is Jandhan, Aadhar, Mobile. And it was pretty plain from the beginning that these three would be linked up. And in 2016, in 2010, you had the first strategy vision document. And then in 2016, it got revised because I think they realized by then that biometrics was not really working. So they brought in the concept of the OTP and put that into the project. Now, what this has meant is that a person should be able to enroll onto the database. They should have a registered mobile number, which will stay their mobile number over a period of time. They should have a bank account which will reflect both these if they are going to be able to get any kind of support from the state. Now, in the idea in the beginning was that they will use the poor and the leakages in the system. That is what they will use to try and get, to expand the project and to get it rolling in the first instance and to expand it. That was the legitimacy that the project sought. What happened with the Supreme Court judgment in 2018? See, 2017, after having, said that there is no right to privacy, and I must pause here and say that some of us still think that one of the reasons that they brought up the question of the right to privacy not being right at all, one of it is because they could not proceed with the project. But another reason was also to just defer the decision on the case so that they could carry on with enrollment and cover as much of the population as they could. And by now, there is evidence to show how by the time the Supreme Court decision came in, they had basically enrolled the whole population. And this is after being told that it is not mandatory, you cannot make it mandatory, you cannot deny anyone anything at all through that process. Now, when you see what, I'm just going to pause for a minute and ask you to repeat that last part of the question because I think I've moved away from it for the moment.
No, so my question, what I was trying to bring up is that we know some of the problems that we read about. Children not getting midday meals or admission or identity theft, etc. But you have flagged far more serious problems. So that's what the whole idea, for example, of a single document that can identify everything about you and identify all your actions, identify the government has access to everything you're doing. And as you have said, even the private sector has access to everything. Just give us a kind of a overview or granular view, if you want, examples of what exactly these issues are and why are they so serious.
So the first part of it, I've already told you, I won't go back to that. But when you get into the field, the kind of things that you see, we've been watching this system from the word go. We've gone where enrollments were taking place. We know, for instance, that they kept trying to get the fingerprint and the iris, but they had been told in the first 5 years that if the fingerprint doesn't work or the iris doesn't work, especially the fingerprint, if you try it 4 times and it still doesn't work the fourth time, then you do what is called a forced capture, which means you just enroll them anyway. You send that data to the UIDAI because the idea was that everyone should have a unique number by which they can be identified. The second thing is that the UIDAI and its support proponents will constantly be telling you that, oh, but the UID does not carry any data at all. It's very basic data. What they will never talk about is that the 3 words which Mr. Nilekani used in the first meeting where I heard him, which is unique, ubiquitous, and universal, is in fact the essence of the project. So you may give everyone a unique number, which then becomes ubiquitous, which is what you are talking about. It is in every database. You can't interact with a database without your number having to be there. And universal, this will automatically make it universal. This has been the agenda from the word go. This is nothing new. And it is also clear that when they were talking about these 3, if you look at Jandan mobile, that is a bank account, Aadhar, and mobile, you'll realize that these are the 3 things that companies need to be able to, onload customers cheap without having to spend too much on it. And that's been a continuing part of the conversation. Now, in 2000, when you go to the ground, you find that in the first 5 years, those who got enrolled, there are huge errors. You'll find, for instance, a whole village, you'll find that names are wrong. You'll find, I have, for instance, a person in my home whose sister has been enrolled as Bahu because the head of the household had to give the name and he will not mention the name of his daughter-in-law. So he just said Bahu. Now she is not able to relate her name with the rest of her documents. She passed out, she passed out of school. She can't relate these 2 documents, but nobody cared. See, something that I think a lot of the people working on UID have been insisting and saying, for heaven's sake, recognize this, is that there is no verification done of the data that is given and the data that is entered into the system at the time of enrollment. There is nothing. So by now, the name, you can't be sure. Very often it is wrong. The address is no longer acceptable by most agencies. They don't accept the address as being accurate. The biometrics have stopped working. Age is not accepted. So what is this ID? Other than being a unique number, it doesn't identify anything about the person, but it tells whoever is interested. And today you have in the papers the idea of a Parivar Pehchan Patra in Haryana, where they are now saying we are going to open this out to all government agencies and we are going to tell them, please be careful about security. What does it even mean? So the ambitions that it has stoked is huge. Then the errors, the number of errors that have come up because of this, and for the working, for the poor working classes, for the farmer, for the, loader, for those who work, washing dishes because the chemical affects their fingers, their biometrics don't work. And if it doesn't work, the only person who bears the burden of that is not the system. If you look at what the UIDAI has done all along, it has said, nobody should deny anyone a service. We are leaving it to the local authority to figure it out. Why
even the courts have said that nobody should be.
Yeah, they say nobody should, but here they say that let the local agencies take care of it. Why does it happen? Because their system doesn't work. But there is no answerability in the system. We have to remember that the UIDAI is not answerable for any failures. It's a kind of, and it's so weird because if I have to, if I have to get my biometrics updated, the only way I can do it is by getting an OTP to my registered mobile phone. What if I don't have a mobile phone? What if I can't afford a mobile phone? What if my mobile phone number changed because at some time I had it and then it went off? What if, as it happened in the first 5 years, what if they were asked for the mobile number they didn't have, so some neighbor, somebody just gave their number to be used? Then what is to happen to them? Now, the thing is, if they had been serious, there would have been a feedback loop. There is no feedback loop. There is no grievance redressal. There is no calling them up and saying, listen, I'm not being given my rations because my fingerprint is not working. Can you please do something? There is nothing. So the UIDAI is an agency that basically can gather everyone's data, but is not responsible for that system working. It will work for those for whom it works. For those whom it doesn't work, after all, we are a country that believes in God. So leave it to God.
But again, no, going back, you were saying that
Let
there
me
are.
start one thing, Siddharth. One of the basic problems that was identified even in the beginning was the question of exclusion. That you say that this is so that people can get their entitlements. This, in fact, may end up keeping people away from from their entitlements, finding denial happening every time. We have seen that happen time after time after time. NREGA, you have to get the job card, you need your thing to work. What work are these people doing? Really, you expect their fingerprints to work? And because you're doubtful that that will work, you now have facial recognition. Then you have additional things that are brought to surveil those who've come into work. Then your rations, people are just dropping off. In fact, today on NREGA, there is a little news saying some lakhs of people, their numbers have been taken off the NREGA list. Why? Because it might have been because they changed their place from where they are to some other place, or it might have been because the place has become from being a rural area, it's now called an urban area. It might be because they are fraud, fake, or duplicate. It might be anything. But there is no interest in knowing what the problem is. I think people like MKSS and John and Ritika have been asking for the longest time, saying, listen, if you're saying that this level of of wrong was being done in the PDS system, how come you're not going after the people who actually siphoned off all of this money? Why do you not care to do it? Because the intention here is only to coerce people to come onto the system. And if you can't do it, in 2017, the first recorded death because of the UID happened of 11-year-old child. And it was dismissed off by some of the project proponents saying, no, but it's okay. These things should not happen. But overall, the project is good. So this is if I were to give you another illustration, there are a number of people for whom this is happening. I'll just give you one illustration. Now, in the bank, they are all asked to add their UID numbers to their bank account. Now, when you give such large numbers into a bank, into a rural bank is the one that I visited and saw, you find that they're all keeping it one below the other with only the numbers showing, name and numbers showing. Do you expect that it will happen, for 100, 200, 300, 1,000 a day, to all of this to happen without any error? So there is this person during COVID, they all go to the Common Service Center to see, what kind of that government has put in money. So let's go find out what there is. Everybody else has some 2,500, 3,000, 3,500 in their account. This person has 1,12,000 in his account. So he asks them, what is this? Because you just give your fingerprint, you give your UID number, and they tell you in the Common Service Center how much money is in your account. So he then asks, what is this? They say, nahi, Modi Sarkar ne bheja hai. So then he withdraws a little because all the others haven't taken much. When the banks open, he goes to the bank and he asks them to update his passbook. It is not reflected in his passbook. He asks them why not, and says that they said. He says, then you collect it from there. So he goes back to the Common Service Center and it is constantly given to him. The money is given to him over the period of the next 2 years. After which suddenly the bank manager lands up at his home one day and says, you have committed a crime. You have put your number into somebody else's account. Now, how an illiterate man sitting rolling BDs is going to put his number into somebody else's account, don't ask me, because the system doesn't ask those questions. And he therefore spends some time in jail. Everybody knows that this is an error of the system. So finally, there is an agreement that is made. And they say, okay, over a period of time, you pay back the person from whose account you've been taking it, because we wrongly put your UID number into that. Now, whose fault is this and who is getting criminalized? This is not a one-off thing, I can tell you. I mean, when I was walking down that place, they were telling me, wahan bhi hua hai, inka bhi hua hai. So these are not, and nobody is there to listen. See, one of the things that's happened with this is what is called disintermediation. a bureaucrat was supposed to be an intermediary between the state and people's interest. Now they are told, and there's a Niti Aayog document for between 2015 and 18, which says that if a bureaucrat, if an official meets people, then there is room for corruption. So don't meet them. The computer screen is sufficient for you to know you'll get all the data there and you act on that basis. So the idea of the bureaucrat as someone who goes to see if systems are working has collapsed. And if you go to the local person, they'll say, but this we have nothing to do with. The Tahsildar and the BDO has no clue what this is about. And when I say they are not doing an audit, I mean it very seriously. Nobody cares to know. Because if you know, you cannot continue with this system.
One of the things you mentioned a little earlier on, not in this conversation, but somewhere, that it can lead to other serious social problems where an Aadhaar being such a, in the public eye, such a solid proof of who you are, can be asked by any government agency and can be asked by any private person.
Yeah. So in fact, the fact that any government agency can ask you is bad enough. But when you think that there is no rule, no law, and no enforcement of basic principles, that just about someone going on the street can't come and ask me to establish my identity, tells us in what kind of precarity people who are from the marginalized communities live and people from the minorities. I mean, I can't think of the number of times when in the newspapers you'll see that a Muslim was being harangued by somebody and then they asked him for his Aadhar card. There was one case where they said, you're trying to pass yourself off as a Hindu, and therefore they beat him up. And then when they actually went to find out what it was, they found that it was an error that had been made by putting either his address or something, one of the parts of his address, onto the name. Whatever, the point is that allowing an ID like this to be used in this rampant fashion with no consequences for people who abuse it is a very, this is not part of the business end of the issue. This is part of the political end of the issue. And it's significant that throughout, Mr. Nilekani, for instance, has refused to talk about surveillance. He's refused to talk about other consequences of the project. He just keeps saying, oh, this will improve things and this will get better systems. I just want to say one other thing in this. It's not an accident that he is not interested in any of this, because that, it's a small team of people who are working on this, and they belong, they when they moved out of the UIDAI, they were part of what is called ISPERT, Indian Software Some Professionals Roundtable. Now, they have been, centrally involved in the creation of many of these products, products like e-sign, e-KYC, DigiLocker, things like that. So they've been those who've been creating the product and what they themselves call evangelizing the product to the state. Now, their interest is in seeing how business can use this. This is essentially, and it's fascinating the way this has progressed. In the beginning, they don't talk about business at all. Then when the case is going on in the court in 2018, I think, 18 January, Mr. Nilekani writes an article in Hindustan Times where he says, this is actually creation of an infrastructure. Anybody, like a road, anybody should be able to use it. So according to him, all our data, which is kept in a database, is like a road. It's an infrastructure and everyone should be able to use it. Prior to that, he had already said that unlike the US, where people became wealthy before they became data rich, in India, we don't have that much wealth, but we have a lot of data. So people should give up their data so that it can trickle up and it can then help towards creating an economy, towards improving the economy. Then when the privacy case comes up, you find the Justice Sri Krishna committee being set up, and listen to their title, And it's significant that except for Justice Sri Krishna, all the others on the committee were people who had either written or had appeared as lawyers in the court against privacy and for the project. So they call the report is titled A Free and Fair Digital Economy. It is not called privacy. It is not called digital security. It's called A Free and Fair Digital Economy protecting privacy, empowering Indians. So it's fascinating what they did. Then it goes on, when you come to a slightly later date, you find that the Supreme Court then strikes down the right of private entities to use this. So in 2019, they quickly bring an amendment where they say that no, you can use it, just use it offline. That's the only major shift that they make because they are working for companies. Then you have, and in 2020, you have good governance rules that are brought in. And then now in 2025, they've changed those rules to say this is really not about leakage. This is not about subsidies. This is not even about good governance. It is about private industry being able to use this data. So they have actually, in a very cynical kind of way, removed those lines in the introduction to that provision. They don't use language which has to do with subsidy and leakage and all of that. And they add a line where they say that it is basically saying that it is for private industry to use. And today you have Mr. Vaishnav saying this is not against the Supreme Court order, and this will just make it ease of living and ease of livelihood for people. Now you can say whatever you want, but this is what's been happening throughout. And we also know that the Supreme Court the judicial system has a lot to answer for in this, because every delay in the system means that by the time they actually reach it, the harm is done. So you find that till today, there is a case pending on the question of money bills. It's a very significant issue that is at the core of democracy, the core of parliamentary democracy. Can the Lok Sabha pass a law over which the Rajya Sabha has nothing to say? Or they can say and they don't have to be heard or considered. Can that happen? And the Aadhar Act was passed as a money bill. And Mr. Justice Sikri, when he gave his judgment, tried really hard to try and make it, somehow find constitutionality in it. And then he could not find constitutionality in Section 57. So you find that the idea of private companies using it just had to be struck off. Now they've brought it back quite brazenly, and not even through a law, through rules. So it worries me when I think that there are these, when the state itself begins to think that rule of law is not important. When the state itself believes that it is not the interests of the individual citizen or person in the country, but it is business interest that is important. And when business interest is going to control our identities and use it in any way that they want, I worry about what that means. And it's, the datafication of people that has been happening is another thing.
Well, yes, today Mr. Vaishnav has said, and basically then the whole thing reveals itself as a ploy to, at government expense, collect this masses of data about everybody so you can profile them. And, we keep talking about how Google ads come to us and we get very head up, etc. But this is the government itself justifying, here's a lot of data, please take it and do what you want with it. And what are the ways it will be used?
See, the idea behind this, one of the things that they are certainly doing is they've created this digital public infrastructure. What they do not, and that's been sold, you would have seen from G20 on, it's been sold as this great panacea for various kinds of things, and it's being sold in different parts of the world. It's a great contribution that India is making to the world. What is this digital public infrastructure? First of all, it thinks in terms of digital public goods. So many of the things that are being created to surveil us are actually considered as good digital public goods. Then the infrastructure, this word infrastructure has become very important because the idea that people's data is now infrastructure is a significant shift that's happened. It happened from the Sri Krishna Committee report. By that time, they were not in a position to say that privacy is not a fundamental right. So what they did say is that privacy, yes, of course you have privacy, but do you know why you have privacy? So that you can hand over all that it produces to the state, to the community at large, so that we can have more products that are created through this. So it's about the economy. That's why that committee report is about economy. What is fascinating is that, the state today, the government today has an agenda of wanting their 5 trillion economy, and they have to find ways by which they create this. And data seems to be, land, water, minerals, these are all contested natural resources. This is a way by which they are creating another what is called a natural resource. And the way this is being defined takes your data away from you and puts it somewhere outside you, which means it is no longer about your privacy. So anything that is found in the public domain, anything that can be anonymized, and anonymization by now we know is a complete myth. De-anonymization takes no time, especially when you're putting it in multiple databases. There is no question of anonymization. But what is also interesting is that, recently there was a report that said that many of the Jandan accounts have just remained dormant. Nobody is using those accounts. And it's fascinating that while they have that figure, nobody knows why. People need the money. People in whose accounts is being put need the money. Why is it not being taken out? This is something from COVID on we've been seeing, and there is nothing that the government is doing to find out why is it that people are not collecting their monies. We have some hypotheses. We have, for instance, we say that it's because people don't even know they have those accounts. Accounts were opened when their UID was opened, they have no clue. Secondly, it's because when they go to it, it doesn't work for them. And thirdly, because it's too far away, nobody comes to them with it, it's too difficult for them to be able to manage a bank and an account and a system. Nobody cares about this. So the money after some time will get returned to the government and they will call all these people fake and fraud and duplicate and whatever. So and actually, I was saying if in another 5-7 years, if we accept all the government's thing on fake, fraud and duplicate, the population of India may actually more than halve.
Why is that?
Because everybody will be fake and fraud and duplicate. No, only half the population is going to survive as real and alive and non-fraudulent. It's crazy.
But by the way, this also feeds into a larger agenda of having a particular kind of population.
Oh, yeah. But what's also fascinating, and this is something Dr. Devi, G.N. Devi had pointed out, somewhere in the middle of all of this happening, they said India's population has exceeded the population of China. He asked only one question. He said, how do we know? We haven't had a census. The two things that are usually used are census and birth and death registration. We don't have either. So how do we know that we've overtaken it? Why do people feel the need to say, why does the government feel that we need to say that the population has exceeded that of China? And there are many answers to this. See, the one thing to remember is anyone controlling the UID database, we already have a system by which they can disable or omit a number. There's nothing to say you can't add numbers to it. I'm saying that the only way you can get trust in the system is if you open it up for scrutiny. Why are they not allowing us to open it up for scrutiny? What's stopping them?
You've been saying about surveillance, and that's clearly attached to privacy. But let me give you a counterintuitive kind of this reply that do say even not the marginalized people in general, but even those who are reasonably aware of what's going on, educated, middle class, upper middle class, etc. Do they see privacy as a concern? And I'll tell you why I'm asking this question. Say, for example, these new forms of registration have emerged. Digi Yatra, Digi Wallet, where you put all your certificates, all your qualifications in one particular app.
Locker, yeah.
Digi Locker, sorry. Digi Wallet. They willingly give it. I mean, you go to the airport and you'll see people willingly queuing up through Digi Yatra because it facilitates. They think it's a smooth entry into the airport and you just go through. Do people really care about privacy? It's a I know it's a kind of provocative question, but what do
Not
you
at
think?
all. Not at all. Actually, the thing is, there is a way in which it's sold as efficient. It's sold as convenient. And there are many people who walk into that convenience. If you look at the kind of pitched battles that have been around land or about water or about minerals, you'll find that these are tangible things which people know when they lose. They know what they are losing. When your data is being used in multiple ways, you don't even know it. How many people even know who holds the data of Digiyatra? Is anybody even asking? Is how many people know that they had a re-enrollment of Digiyatra happening because there was some problem that happened in the middle and they had to restart the process? How many people even know? So, this is a country where we have got so used to systems not particularly helping us that we just get on to whatever there is and hope for the best. Which is why I say for things like this, we cannot leave it to the individual. I don't know what I'm losing and I don't know what what may happen when I give up my data. By the time it happens, it's too late for me to do anything about it. And that's why you have a state. A state is supposed to be there to protect the interests of the people. Let's take something like this. DeepSeek, right? Now, DeepSeek has beaten OpenAI hollow. How did they do it? They didn't spend any money on it. How did they do it? Where did they get all the data from? Because any artificial intelligence tool requires a huge amount of data. Where were they getting all this from? If you look at what's been happening in the US, many of their core data, which has been held by various agencies, have been it keeps getting breached, and then they say, oh, China has taken it. Whether China has taken it or not, it's got taken, it's got breached. This is a very common, and somebody like Commodore Batra has been saying for the longest time, what are you doing by putting the health data of every soldier in this country onto a database, digital database with the UID number attached to it? It is insecure because anybody can, the word that is used is non-rivalrous about data. Non-rivalrous means you can be using it, I can be using it, I won't even know if somebody else is using it at the time that I'm using it. So it can get taken away and you won't even know it for the longest time. In this country, cyber security is not even in its infancy. Can you think of the kind of national risk we are taking when we do this? I can't understand how a government is not concerned. Maybe they want to help their corporate, friends. Maybe they believe that they will produce some GDP for them, but would they really want it at the cost of national security? That it can be picked up anywhere. I mean, it boggles my mind, I must say.
In 2012, you submitted a report of a committee on privacy, which you had been part of. And when we are talking 2012, which was a slightly different environment, political and social, what were the recommendations and what came of it?
So actually, it's interesting that at that time, the reason that the privacy committee was set up was really two things. One was the UID project, and the second was a DNA human profiling bill, which was also pending at that time. And the minister at that time was concerned. He said, we are having to give our replies and we have to do whatever, but I'm really concerned about what this means in terms of people and their rights and things. So in that, we also looked at the National Population Register and the rules that were made under that. We also looked at the Collection of Statistics Act, which had been changed and had been introduced in 2008, all of which were showing a tendency towards asking people to report to the state and to tell the state, to give the state whatever information they asked. Now, this is completely contrary to why a state exists. The state does not exist to be a people's bully. It exists so that it can help people get their rights. So, but when in 2012 we were looking at the privacy question, we were actually somewhat handicapped because the privacy question had been initially, for the first 20 years of our constitution, we didn't really have much of a privacy right. And then there were two judgments which seemed like it could go either way. And then from 75 onwards, bit by bit, case by case, they had developed it. They had learned to acknowledge privacy as a right. But asserting that it is a constitutional right did not exist and a fundamental right. So we were constrained by that, but we could see that there are at least 9 principles that need to be followed. If you want, like for data especially, that what can you collect, how long can you keep it, when do you need to destroy it, what is the question of consent, 9 questions, 9 principles that we had established. Nothing happened on it. And then you had the Sri Krishna committee report, which just pretend, that's it. After that, it's only been where the Sri Krishna committee wanted it to go, which is about the economy. So this whole idea that our data is not our own, forget, it's not just about privacy. It's about who's laying claim to our data. Personal information about myself, somebody is laying claim to it. That at least should make people wake up. I mean, is it really okay for us that some, like if you look at the Parivar Pehchan Patra report today in the papers, you'll find that they are saying they'll give it to every government department from the state level to the local level. Anybody can get access to it. And there are no rules on how they get access to it, how they should be identified as having got access to it, how they should have used it. Nothing. It's just open. It's called data sharing. So how much do you really want, your local agent or, somebody else, not just to know you now, but to know you across time, across databases? How much do you want it to know? People think very often, and it's actually fascinating, people think that they have nothing to hide till they realize that they have an enormous amount. And, it's like when bank accounts numbers are open, when UID numbers are open, when mobile phone numbers are open, and these are all getting linked up in multiple ways using the UID, then there is theft happening every day. There are scams happening every day. So I'm only hoping that at least now that it's hit us, and it's hit the middle classes as much as it has hit anybody else, that all this data and the idea that the mobile phone can hold all of this, that is what is threatening all the money that you've earned. All the work that you do, everything is just going in one shot because you're being threatened with all. Of course, it's also linked up with how the ED, CBI, all of them get used, and therefore you're willing to believe when somebody calls up and says, I'm from the CBI and this is my, this is what I'm going to challenge you on, and you might get put in prison. It's interesting that people are willing to believe this. It tells us something about the system, no? So when it reaches that point, then I have people calling me up and saying, how do I hide my UID number? How do I hide my bank account number? Much after they've put everything out. Every person I know who's had this problem has gone and changed their bank account because they know that this number is insecure, but they're not able to change their UID number. It's for life.
No, but you change a bank number, they will still, account number, they'll still ask you for the Aadhaar.
Yeah. So that's precisely my point. You can change the bank account number, you can't change your UID number. Although I must say that no bank is allowed to ask you for your UID number. They can just ask you for an ID. And it's only the government has said, and this is Mr. K.K. Venugopal when he was Attorney General, who said that, since you're giving them, subsidy, you can ask the bank also to be, you put the number in the bank account also, which actually is, to my mind, not required at all and wrong. It's not like the Supreme Court said people who are requiring the support of the state do not have a right to privacy. They did not say that. They said if you need to cut into their right to privacy so that you can deliver the service, to that extent you can do it. But it's being made as if people who are poor don't have a right to privacy, full stop. And that is not correct.
Tell me, Usha.
Just one word, Sidharth. Just one word. That when we say privacy, I don't just mean you're knowing who I am or what my name is or where I live or whatever. When data starts getting gathered about me, that data sees me in ways which even I don't understand. That's not how I see myself. We go through stages in life and we change as we go along. There are many things we forget. There are many things that are irrelevant. And there are many ways in which that composite data, depending on what algorithm is placed there, will identify me as something that I may not be at all. So this is just to say that when we say privacy, it's really not about so what if they know my mobile number. So what? It is not a so what. It is actually when in the context of this project, when we talk privacy, it was saying that all manner of people are going to collect data about you, put them together, and then decide who you are. That's what we need to understand. Sorry.
Countries all around the world have identification number like Social Security, etc. American Social Security, various European countries. So the proponents of Aadhar may argue that it's done all over the world. So what is the new thing that we are doing?
So there's two things at least. One, that when they have those numbers there, for instance, I've had conversations with friends from Europe and asked them, after the Holocaust, why would you want each of you to have a number like this? And they don't understand the question because they think that's how the system works. I think we have more wisdom than they have, and I don't think just saying that they have it doesn't justify what we are doing with it. We can see history, we can read history. Apart from that, within that system, they have very stringent requirements to the extent that it will work. If the whole politics changes, it's different. But on an everyday basis, they have very stringent requirements about who can access, how do they register that they have accessed, for what purpose did they access it, and when did that access cease. They can be tracked, they can be asked why they took that data, and there are systems of answerability within that system. In the US context, it is about social security number, which actually they have rules saying that if not any random person can even ask you for that number. It's only for certain things that it's for social security. And now they've linked it up with something like the driving license, which is actually a breach. It's a violation of a person's right. And we should not be following bad examples, should we? To say that there are people who are as bad as us, does that make us good? See, around the world today, states are wanting control over their people. People are having to fight back against this idea that the state has, because those with state power would find it very convenient to have power over a people. And for those for whom the state works, they may not find it a problem if the state knows about them. But that's for today. The state is working for you today. You really don't know about yesterday. You certainly don't know about tomorrow. So this battle that's happening now between people and the state, the idea of the state as like where people are its property, that idea is what needs to be done away with. And that's the kind of idea that people people who are proponents of the UID have no problem with. They are saying, let it be. Let people, come before the state. Let them report to the state. It's not our problem. We are going to use it for some other purpose. It's not our problem. But they create the problem. So contrary to what you said earlier, this is not about technology providing a solution. They are saying technology may produce problems, but they are not our problems. They are your problems. Deal with it. It's highly cynical.
It's cynical and it's dangerous and sinister. I mean, one sees those old World War films in which some cop can stop anybody on the street and say, show me your papers. That's not a theoretical idea anymore if this continues on its path. Tell me, how do you put this genie back into the bottle? How do you reverse this? Considering that the judicial process, the tech guys, the government, and the private sector, which is salivating at the idea of holding on to so much data, though of course the private sector is its own data collection plans and data storage plans. How does this, in the face of this, the citizen or whoever puts this whole thing on a slightly more even keel so that it's there, because now you can't make it disappear, but it's there, but it works for you?
Actually, no, Sidharth, it doesn't work like that. It can't work for you. It was never fashioned to work for you. So let's not pretend that can happen. But there is this that I certainly prefer. First of all, if we were to do genuinely, and right in the beginning we said the project could be, it might work very well and be a problem for us, or it might not work very well and still be a problem for us. in our case, we find that this is not a project that it's a very, very imperfect project. It's a project which depended on technology which they knew nothing about. If I tell you that in 2015, having started enrolling people on biometrics, 2015 they were putting out a thing saying we are going to do research, the UIDAI. We are going to do research because we are going to, we want to find out how to make biometrics work for the national ID, because the nature of the working class population in this country makes biometrics a challenge in 2015. So this is not a project that is working. But in 2021, there was an Aadhar 2.0 conclave that was held, at which Mr. Ram Sevak Sharma and Mr. AP Singh, who both been there from the beginning of the project, both of them categorically said this was never meant for the government. It was meant to create a digital economy. Why is the UIDAI coming in the way of creating a digital economy? And that is how you see this amendment that has come to the 2020 governance rules, where they've taken away the idea of subsidy, they've taken away the idea of leakage and given it over to corporates. So I actually think that there is no reason why a whole populace should be working by giving its data so that corporates can reap some profits. I really don't know why that should be done. And also, the database is deeply defective. That's why they're not opening it up to anyone. They've been fighting off from 2013-14. They've been fighting off showing that biometric database to anybody. Now, if you ask them, how clean is your mobile phone database, you'll find that that is extremely imperfect too. About 50 crore people will not even have any number on that. And if you don't have that number, you can't re-enroll. I mean, you can't go and update anything. You can't update your biometrics. So it is a deeply defective database. It needs an open, thorough, and transparent audit. It will tell us that this is a system that should have been junked a long time ago. It should never have been started. So to think that just because we have some database, just because some numbers have been produced, and just because it's been put among the population, it's actually something that is working, I think we need to think about it again. Also think about this. Every time there is a new place where you find the UID being introduced, whether it is in education, whether it is in vote, whether it is, voter ID, whether it is in bank, school, whatever, you find that, and property registration, everywhere, along with the UID number, they are asking for the mobile number, including even the social security code. Every person who doesn't have a job has to have a mobile, and they have to put that number in. And so there is the UID number, and they generate a third number. So a property identification, that's a separate number. APAR, which is an education, is another number. Everything has additional numbers that are being generated. If I were to carry around those box of numbers with me, I'm too old, my back would break. So there is something in the design of this that is deeply defective, and we really need to see what that is.
Yeah, well, actually, I remember your talks in those days, remember reading your pieces, remember reading the pieces of so many activists. I found even then, and I find even now, the proponents of UIDAI very, very, smug is the only word here. But I think not realizing that this database is imperfect, the system is imperfect, I think should make for some kind of this to say, here, have a look, and let's see how we can improve it. That's not going to happen.
Why? You know why? Because the people most impacted by this are the poor in this country.
Yeah.
And the only use of this number that I have seen so far has been in opening these accounts and putting money into them, which helps electoral results. There is nothing else for which this is being used for the poor. And let's never forget that. That's the reason people like me, at every stage, we used to go through a process of thinking again about it and saying, have we got it wrong? There was nothing. I'm not a campaigner. I'm a researcher. And so I didn't have any particular interest in saying that this is bad or whatever. We would go through that process regularly. People would challenge, if anybody challenged us, we would go through that exercise. But honestly, the carelessness about the poor, I don't even know what to say about it.
It's a very salutary discussion with you. You've really opened up, despite the fact that I have been reading about it and I have my own trepidations. I tried not to enroll for years, but ultimately had to for practical reasons. Um,
That says everything, Siddharth. I did not want to, but I had to. That says everything.
yeah, precisely. And now I have to do some simple change of address. It is proving to be impossible online, and can't find a good center close by. The usual, or more than the usual, the unusual problems that have emerged. You can't be saying that it's for everybody and then not make it easy for them to enroll. So, thank you very much, Usha. I hope somebody listens to this today. As you said, just this morning, the minister says, of course, it's open for the private sector to exploit. So now the after so many years, the real purpose is being unveiled. Uh, Thank you very much for this um, detailed and exposition on what the Aadhaar is and how dangerous and problematic it can be. That was Usha Ramanathan, researcher and activist on the question of Aadhaar. I hope you enjoyed the interview. We'll be back again next week with another edition of the Wire Talks. Till then, from me and the team, goodbye.